A handwritten letter arrived, addressed to him, signed only with initials. The words were tender, longing, and unmistakably romantic. He swears he doesn't know who sent it, but the way his face drained of color tells me otherwise. Now I keep the letter hidden, waiting for the right moment. The envelope slid through the mail slot and landed on the rug like a quiet challenge. I picked it up, felt the weight of it, and called out to him in the next room. He stepped into the hallway, reached for it, and the color drained from his face before the seal even broke. His hand shook. He tried to smile. "Probably a wrong address," he said. It wasn't. I watched him peel the flap open. The handwriting was neat and elegant, a looped script that felt careful and intimate. As he read, the corners of his mouth tightened. He folded the page too quickly, then unfolded it again as if the words wouldn't stay still. "I don't know who sent this," he said, not meeting my eyes. His voice carried a thin edge I recognized from past moments when truth felt dangerous. "Let me see," I said calmly. He hesitated, then passed it over. I took the letter to the kitchen, set it on the table, and read it in silence. The words were gentle but charged. They sounded like someone reaching through time. Lines about missing him. Lines about seasons changing and how the nights felt longer without his voice. At the bottom, only initials, written in a delicate flourish. He lingered in the doorway, arms folded, watching me read. "It's nothing," he said too quickly. "People send odd things sometimes." I nodded without agreeing. I lifted the envelope and checked the postmark. Not local. A coastal town we had never visited together. "I'll keep it safe," I said. He shrugged, pretending not to care. He walked back to his study, left the door half closed, and turned on the radio as if music could push away the letter's echo. I slipped the page into a cookbook no one ever opened, then set the envelope in the drawer with the birthday candles. That afternoon the house felt different. He paced. He made 2 cups of tea, forgot them both on the counter, and started a list he didn't finish. I carried on as usual, folding towels, setting out dinner, choosing quiet tasks that gave me time to think. When I asked how his day was, he changed the subject. When I asked about weekend plans, he said, "Let's not rush," though we had nothing to rush. In the evening I took the letter out again. I read every word. The tenderness was clear. No dramatic declarations. Just soft, steady warmth. The writer mentioned a walk by the water, a bench near a ferry dock, a memory of him laughing at gulls chasing a piece of bread. The details felt too precise to be fiction. They belonged to a place I wasn't part of. "Do you know anyone with those initials?" I asked later in the living room. He didn't look up from the newspaper. "I don't think so," he said. He pressed his thumb along the edge of the page, smoothing it over and over. "Not that I remember." His unease showed in small ways. He avoided the hall table where we usually kept mail. He kept his phone face down. He carried his watch to the study, then carried it back, then returned it again as if he needed to hold something. When a friend called and asked if we'd be at the community dinner next week, he said he might have plans, though we had none. I watched and listened, and the quiet built around us like a wall. 2 days later, another small change surfaced. He started using the old desk in the spare room, a desk he never liked because the drawer stuck. He closed the door and opened the window even when it was cool outside. I heard paper sliding, a pen tapping, a chair creaking. When I walked by, he cleared his throat and asked if we had stamps. We did. I put them on the kitchen counter and returned to the laundry. Memories began to link themselves, as if the letter had drawn a line through past odd moments. A sudden trip last spring, the one he called necessary. The late night calls he stepped outside to take, claiming reception was better near the porch. The small box of mementos I found once while dusting. Ticket stubs, a dried flower, a ferry schedule tucked between receipts. I had asked him then if those things meant anything. He said they were from years ago. He said they were nothing. I sat alone that night with the letter in my hands and thought about names. Could have been a colleague. Could have been a friend. But the tone didn't sound like work or friendship. Sounded like something softer. Something careful. I felt a steady heat rise in me, not wild, not loud, but focused. I wasn't going to waste breath on guesswork. I would wait until the moment mattered. I would gather my own pieces. The next morning, I set the letter aside and watched the way he glanced toward the kitchen drawers whenever he walked in. He was checking, though he wouldn't admit it. He timed his coffee to moments when I was in the garden. He moved quietly but not carefully. When I came back inside, he was standing near the bookshelf looking at the cookbooks. He stepped aside when he saw me, whistled a little, and asked what's for lunch. I smiled. Around noon, a neighbor stopped by with apples from her yard. He accepted them kindly, then excused himself. I stayed on the porch and chatted about the weather and which plants had survived the first cold snap. When she left, I found him in the spare room, not writing, just holding a blank envelope. He set it down when I appeared and said he needed to sort old papers. I said I'd bring in a box to help. He thanked me. He didn't touch the envelope for the rest of the day. That evening we ate quietly. He complimented the stew, then paused as if the compliment tasted wrong in his mouth. "We should go out this weekend," he said. "Take a drive. Somewhere different." I nodded, listened to the way different sat on his tongue. He was trying to move the horizon. He was trying to outrun the letter. After dinner I took a walk alone. The air smelled like wood smoke. A few houses had lights strung along porches, soft and friendly. I passed the small green at the end of the street where benches faced a pond. The scene shifted something inside me. I thought about the bench near the ferry dock mentioned in the letter. A bench is a simple thing. You share one with someone and the memory stays. I stood by the pond and decided I would not ask another question tonight. I would not give the letter any more power in words. I would hold it, guard it, and wait. Back at home, I tucked the letter deeper into the cookbook and slid the book behind others on the shelf. I chose a quiet place where I could reach it easily but where it wouldn't catch his eye. He passed by, kissed my temple lightly, and said he might turn in early. I watched him disappear down the hall. I listened to the water run in the bathroom, the soft click of the lamp, the creak of the mattress. My heart felt steady. Not calm but steady. When the house settled, I went to the spare room. I opened the stuck drawer slowly, eased it past the rough wood, and found his stash of odd papers. A ferry map. A brochure for a coastal inn. A receipt for 2 teas, signed with a scribbled initial I couldn't read. I took nothing. I closed the drawer. I stood long enough to let the shape of the truth form and then left quietly. The next morning brought its own small twist. A second envelope appeared in the mail, addressed to me, no return address. I opened it on the porch. Inside was a blank card with a pressed sprig, simple and clean. No words. No initials. Just a sign that someone knew how to reach our house and preferred silence to ink. I felt a slow spark of resolve. This was not a game. This was careful. This was deliberate. I put the card in my pocket and went inside. I watched his face as I dropped the mail on the table. He scanned for familiar shapes, found none, and pretended relief. I brewed tea, set out 2 cups, and asked if he wanted honey. He said yes, then no, then yes again. He was restless. He wasn't good at hiding how he felt when the room asked him nothing. I took a deep breath and made a quiet promise to myself. I would not let this slip away into excuses or confusion. I would keep the letter safe. I would choose my moment. And when I asked for the truth, I would do it with clear eyes and a steady voice, not from hurt alone but from strength. The letter was a doorway. I was standing at the threshold, patient, watchful, ready. The pressed sprig from the second envelope still rested inside my pocket when I began my search. It was quiet, deliberate work, the kind of searching that required patience and a steady hand. I didn't announce my intentions. I didn't confront him. Instead, I moved carefully, piecing together fragments of a story he had never told me. The first clue came from a box tucked away in the attic. Dust coated its lid, but inside were photographs. Some faded, some sharp. One in particular caught my eye. Him standing near a ferry dock, the same one described in the letter. His smile was wide, his arm draped around someone cropped out of the frame. The scissors had cut cleanly, but the outline of a shoulder remained. I held the photo under the light, tracing the edges, wondering who had once stood beside him. Later I found notes scribbled in old journals. Lists of places, dates, and small reminders. Meet at cafe. Call before the trip. Bring her favorite tea. The handwriting was his, unmistakable. These weren't business notes. They were personal, tender, and they belonged to a chapter one had never been invited to read. At gatherings I began watching him more closely. When certain names surfaced in conversation, his expression shifted. A flicker of recognition, a shadow of guilt. Once, a friend mentioned a woman who had moved away years ago. He laughed too quickly, then excused himself to refill his glass. These small reactions became my map, guiding me toward the truth. I started asking subtle questions, framing them as casual curiosity. Did you ever know anyone from that coastal town? Have you kept in touch with old friends from the ferry days? His answers were vague, evasive. Not really. It's been too long. But the pauses between his words betrayed him. He was hiding something, and the letter was the key. One afternoon I walked alone through the old neighborhood where he once lived. The streets carried echoes, cafes with chipped paint, parks with benches worn smooth by years of use. I stopped at a small shop and spoke to the owner, an elderly man with kind eyes. "You're asking about her?" he said softly. I hadn't mentioned a name, but he knew. She was here often. Always with him. They laughed a lot. His voice carried a tenderness that made my chest ache. At the park, I sat on a bench and listened to the whispers of passers-by. A woman paused, glanced at me and said, "I remember them." She had a way of making him smile. "It's been years, but people don't forget." Her words lingered, heavy and undeniable. Each discovery deepened my suspicion. The sender of the letter wasn't a stranger. She was someone who had once shared his life, someone whose presence still lingered in the corners of his past. Back at home I tested him again. "Do you remember the cafe near the ferry dock?" I asked casually. He froze, then forced a smile. "I might have passed by once." His voice was too light, too rehearsed. I knew better. That night, I sat alone with the letter spread across the table. The initials at the bottom glowed under the lamp. I whispered them aloud, tasting the sound, wondering if he had ever spoken them in this house. The next morning I found another clue. In the drawer of his desk, beneath receipts and pens, was a postcard. The image showed a coastal town, the same one from the postmark. On the back, a short message: "Until we meet again." No signature, just the same initials. My hands trembled as I held it. He had kept it all these years, hidden but not discarded. I confronted him lightly, not with anger but with curiosity. "Where did this postcard come from?" He glanced at it, then shrugged. "I don't remember. Must have been mixed in with old things." His tone was flat, but his eyes betrayed him. He remembered. He remembered too well. Days passed and my resolve strengthened. The letter was not just a message. It was a doorway into secrets he thought buried. I realized I was not only uncovering his past, but also reclaiming my place in the present. I began to move differently. I carried myself with quiet determination, no longer waiting for him to offer answers. I sought them myself. I spoke to neighbors, listened to stories, and pieced together the fragments he had tried to hide. One evening I overheard him on the phone. His voice was low, careful. "No, not now," he said. "It's complicated." He paused, then added, "I'll explain someday." My heart pounded. He wasn't speaking to a stranger. He was speaking to her. I didn't interrupt. I let him finish, then walked into the room as if nothing had happened. He looked startled, guilty, but said nothing. I smiled, sat down, and asked about dinner. My silence was deliberate. I wanted him to know I was watching, listening, waiting. The next day I returned to the attic. I searched deeper, past boxes of holiday decorations and old clothes. At the bottom of one box I found a journal. Its pages were filled with notes, sketches, and fragments of thoughts. One entry stood out: "She said goodbye too quickly." I wasn't ready. The words were raw, unpolished, but they carried the weight of truth. I closed the journal, my hands steady. The pieces were coming together. The letter was not an accident. It was a continuation of something unfinished, something he had tried to bury but couldn't. That night I sat by the window watching the moonlight spill across the floor. I thought about the woman, about the memories he carried, and about the role I had been forced into. I wasn't going to let myself be erased. I wasn't going to live in someone else's shadow. The traces of the past were clear now, etched into photographs, notes, and whispers. And I was ready to face them no matter how much it hurt. I laid the letter on the table between us, the paper trembling slightly under the weight of the silence. His eyes fell on it, and in that instant the mask he had worn for weeks cracked. Recognition flooded his face, draining it of composure. He didn't reach for the letter. He didn't even try to explain. That silence was louder than any confession. "You know who sent this," I said, my voice steady, sharper than it had ever been with him. He opened his mouth, closed it again, and looked away. The lamp cast shadows across his features, and for the first time, I saw guilt etched into every line. "I don't," he began, but I cut him off. Don't lie. Not now. I've watched you flinch at names, avoid questions, hide scraps of the past like they were treasures. This letter isn't random. It's her. His shoulders sagged and he pressed his palms against the table. I wanted to keep the past alive, he admitted finally, his voice low, reluctant. The letter stirred feelings I thought were gone. The words burned, but they also freed me. I had suspected, pieced together fragments, but hearing him say it stripped away the last illusion. He wasn't haunted by mystery, he was clinging to memory. Anger rose in me, hot and sharp, but beneath it was clarity. I wasn't going to be a shadow in someone else's story. I stood, walked to the window and looked out at the night. The street was quiet, but inside me a storm raged. You wanted to relive what you lost, I said, turning back to him. But I am not her. I will never be her. He flinched as though the truth itself struck him. I didn't mean. You did, I interrupted. Every word, every silence, every glance at that letter. You meant it. The confrontation shifted something between us. He had always carried control quietly, shaping the narrative, guiding the steps. But now the balance tilted. My defiance unsettled him. He saw me not as a replacement but as someone who refused to bend. The days that followed became a test of wills. He suggested revisiting places tied to his memories, but I chose differently. When he mentioned the cafe by the ferry dock, I walked into the market instead, weaving through stalls filled with spices and fabrics. When he lingered near the pier, I climbed the hill to watch the sunset from a place untouched by his past. Each choice was deliberate, each step mine alone. He resisted, tried to pull me back into his script. Why are you avoiding the places I show you? He asked one afternoon, frustration creeping into his tone. Because they're not mine, I replied calmly. I won't live in borrowed memories. His silence afterward was heavy, but it carried defeat. One evening I returned home later than usual. He was waiting, pacing the living room. Where were you? He demanded. Living, I said simply. Making my own memories. The words unsettled him. He stared at me, searching for weakness but found none. For the first time he realized I wasn't bending. I began carving out my own steps more boldly. I spoke to locals, listened to their stories and created moments that belonged to me alone. At a small bakery, the owner offered me warm bread and asked nothing of my past. At the pier, I watched children chase gulls, their laughter unburdened by memory. Each moment was mine, untainted, unborrowed. He grew quieter, his resistance fading. He watched me, unsettled, as though realizing he could no longer control the narrative. One night he finally broke. Why are you doing this? He asked, his voice rising. Because I refuse to be her shadow, I said firmly. I am not here to relive your past. I am here to live my present. His face hardened, but beneath the anger was fear. Fear that his illusion was crumbling, that the past he clung to was slipping away for good. I didn't relent. I continued carving out my own story, visiting places he avoided, speaking to people he ignored. I found joy in small things. A musician playing in the square, the taste of fruit I had never tried before, the kindness of strangers who saw me as myself, not as a reflection of someone else. The confrontation deepened each day, but so did my strength. I no longer waited for him to guide me. I guided myself. On our last evening, I placed the letter back on the table. He stared at it, then at me. I thought I could bring it back, he admitted finally. But I see now, it's gone. I nodded, my voice steady. Love cannot survive in borrowed memories. You can't rebuild the past by dragging someone else into it. He lowered his gaze, the truth settling between us. When I walked away, I carried no souvenirs, no borrowed fragments of his past. What I carried was strength, the quiet revenge of reclaiming my own life. Revenge wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was the act of refusing to be anyone's second chapter, of walking away with dignity intact. The confrontation had ended, but the lesson remained carved deep inside me. I was no longer a shadow. I was my own story.